Okay, good afternoon and welcome to Rotary. We're going to start today with the most silence for Perryman Bruce Master. He passed away on February 20th. Services were held on Sunday, the 28th. Bruce joined Waco Rotary in 1996 and All Years Fellow in 2014. He's a moment of silence. Okay, we'll all stand up and lead us in the singing.
Our next one. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hail at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight for the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, yea, proved through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And B.J. Reeves is going to lead us in our invocation.
Thank you, Russell. Join me as we celebrate the mercy and the love of God. Father God, today the fragile peace that we've enjoyed appears to be poised to simply disappear from our lives. But we are reminded that for every Goliath, there is a David. For every impossibility, there is a miracle. For every Russia, there is a Ukraine. God bless the people of Ukraine. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, Kim Patterson is going to come up and do our introductions of guests today.
Thank you, Russell. We have a lot of guests today. I'm excited to welcome to our Rotary Club today, Mr. Greg Keel, guest of his bride.
I didn't know if you had one.
Keith Brown is here with her husband Curtis. First, for the Browns. Hi, Keith. Brenna Fisher with Lee Fisher. Oh, hi there. Todd Stoner, guest of Russell Lipsack. Hi, Todd. Jeff Ann's, who is here with Susan Ann's. Noah Smith is a guest of Bill Smith. Dylan Irving is a guest of Bill Johnson. Addis McNamara is also with Bill Johnson today. Katie Garrett, guest of Trish Griffin. Hi, Katie. And Leah Cox, also a guest of Trish Griffin. Hi, Leah. Welcome, everybody.
Yeah, welcome everybody. And now we're going to do our student guests. Allison, so we're just going to do introduce our student guests.
Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. It's my honor today to present to you Bruce High School students Tatiana Schwarm. Tatiana is a senior, and she is daughter of Jara Sadler and Tyrone Horn. She has siblings Tyrone, Kyra, Tatiana, and Tarwin. She is president of STUCO, active in powerlifting, tennis, track, National Honor Society, UIL. She is attending Mary Hart Baylor and is going to study to be a pediatric nurse. We also have Colby Talbert. He is Bristol Eddy Sr., his father Ed Tolbert and mother Ginger, and brother Connor. He studies football, basketball, baseball, powerlifting, track, golf, UIL, National Honor Society, STUCO, and FFJ. He is attending the Mays Business School at Texas A&M, and they leave maroon like no other. He's got mother, father, and brother who attend. Let's introduce them today.
Good job.
Tatiana would like to tell you a little bit about herself and her plans coming up.
Hi, my name is Tatiana. After I graduated high school, I plan on going to Mary Hart Baylor to become a pediatric nurse. I've been thinking about going to Mary Hart Baylor since my freshman year of high school. I've wanted to become a nurse since 6th grade. I've always had a love for helping people, and I think the best way to help people is being a nurse. And that is very much.
Hi, my name is Colby. I've known I'm going to go to A&M since I was born. I'm going to join the cult. I'll be going to Mays Business School to study business administration, and I'll minor in communications and sports management. And then once I graduate from A&M, I'd like to find a job in sports media.
Okay, thank you guys for joining us today. We now have an introduction of a new member, Rosemary Mays. No, we're not doing that today? Okay. No Marlena? All right, we'll introduce Marlena next time. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started here. Carr, if you'd like to come up and be the chair of the day, introduce our speaker, Dr. Perryman.
Speaker for today is Dr. Ray Perryman. I will abbreviate this introduction so that Dr. Perryman can spend more time talking to us and answering questions. You can read about Dr. Perryman's biography on PerrymanGroup.com. Just a brief introduction. Dr. Ray Perryman is President and CEO of Perryman Group, an economic research and analysis firm based in Waco, Texas. His firm has served the needs of more than 2,500 clients, including 2/3 of the Global 25, over half of the Fortune 100, 12 largest technology firms in the world, 10 U.S. cabinet departments, 9 largest firms in the U.S., the 6 largest energy companies operating in the U.S., and the 5 largest U.S. banking institutions. So please welcome Dr. Richard.
Okay, this is only working. Good. Okay, good. Thanks, Carl. I appreciate that very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm trying to do this a year when I can, but we've had some rough times in the last couple of years. But I know nobody's escaped it through families or businesses or friends, and no one's escaped what we've been through. I will say it was a privilege to put on pants and come talk to y'all today. I've had to get back into that habit over the past few months. It was nice. My wife has always said, as many of you know, I'm married to the former mayor of Odessa. And one of the first laws of economics, in fact, I think the first law of economics is when you marry the mayor, you move. So even though I work in Waco, I've lived in Odessa the past 30 years. And she's often said the secret to our marriage is we've been married 30 years together 3 weeks. And I think there's some truth to that. And so there was one day, a few weeks ago, and I was on her last nerve. One of those days. Probably even in Hawaii, those were my worst days. It wasn't even in Hawaii. But anyway, I said to her, I said, well, how do you know the problem is? I'm just like bad testing medicine. You know, it's better in smaller doses. She thought about that for a minute. She said, well, not quite. She said, every time I've taken bad tasting medicine, at some point it's made me feel better. I haven't gotten there yet, so that's kind of how that went. Obviously, there's a lot going on right now. I'm going to try to focus on a few things here locally and nationally, that sort of thing. We have time for questions at the end. I will be happy to talk about other things. I'm going to touch on Ukraine, some of those things, but we'll go into things in more detail. I'll be happy to. We're, like as always, working on just about everything that's going on right now. So I'm happy to be, happy to talk about any of it. I'm going to start a little bit, and I don't think dwell on the past 2 years because it's rough. Before you seem to getting out of it now. But there are a couple of things about this from an economic perspective I want to point out to you that are a little bit different than what we're accustomed to. The first one is, normally, when we have a recession, it's not because of something from the outside. It's not some big outside force that comes and hits us like a ton of bricks. Normally, it's something we did. We created ourselves. To go back and look through history, I mean, if you ever had your economics class, have y'all taken economics in high school? I'm so sorry. It's awful, isn't it? But anyway, you have to take more of it if you're going to Mays. They're going to go up bad stuff. Anyway, they teach you about the business cycle. And the truth of the matter is, in the history of the world, there's never been an economy that's like a sine curve. It just went up and down, very smooth, but that's never been the case. But there were usually business cycles for most of history, simply because for most of history, most economies were agrarian. And when you have an agricultural economy, you're going to have ups and downs, depending on the weather and a variety of other things. Those do tend to kind of come in some cycles, so you kind of do get cycles. But when economies get bigger, one thing can be going up and something else can be going down. And so on balance, you kind of keep growing for a while and not go through the traditional cycle. We see a classic example right in Texas. I'm sure all of you are kind of upset about the price of oil right now. My folks where I live out in Odessa, man, they're just sitting there. And that kind of one area does well, another area suffers, and one industry does well, another suffers. You kind of get by for a while without things going up and down too much. But so usually when we have a recession, it's because we messed up. The last one was the mortgage crisis. We went crazy getting mortgages, we had no business getting. We wrote bonds, secured by those mortgages, gave away all the bad mortgages we could, so we started writing derivatives on the bonds. And derivatives, they make them sound complicated, they're side bets. It's all that derivative is. That's all it is. Have you ever been on a horse? Oh, no, so you don't have to raise your hands. I know where we are, we're playing. If you've ever been on a horse, you bought a derivative. Because you don't own the horse. But you get paid based on how the horse performs. That's all a derivative is. You didn't own those mortgages, but you got paid based on how they perform. That's it. That's all it is. And so we did that. The trader went crazy. The one before that was .com stocks. We went crazy on .com stocks. Whether they will ever make you money or not, if their last name was .com, they were a whole bunch of money. A few years before that, we did one on syndications and buildings and buildings and TVs. Always, we create a bubble and then we have to work our way through it. This was completely different. It came from the outside. And so it was different because normally there's a predictable pattern of these things. There's task forces, there's bills, there's regulation, you kind of work your way through it. This one, it was a health crisis. And so we had to go about it in a completely different way. And they put me on the task force, and I was like, I don't know anything about this stuff. Mortgages, I like to help you. I can't help you with this one. But anyway, they put us on there because of the health. That's kind of how that works. Fortunately, they put some good doctors on there too. So that helped a little bit. But anyway, then the other thing about it is that I think is unique, it's hard to appreciate unless you're a nerd like me and stare at data a lot, but that is how fast and how hard it is compared to anything we've seen before. And just to put a few numbers on this, the Great Recession back in 2008, the mortgage bubble, worst thing since the Great Depression. In 14 months, the country lost 9.4 million jobs. That's $700,000 a month. Every month after month after month. 9.4 million jobs, 14 months. This one was 23.5 million jobs in 2 months. 2.5 times as many jobs, 1/7 at the time. It literally just fell like a rock. And one other illustration that I've used a few times, and I think is is really telling. There's a number that nobody paid any attention to for years, except people, again, nerds like me. But a lot of people start paying attention to it. It's called initial claims for unemployment. Now, that's a long way of saying layoffs. Because why you file an initial claim for unemployment? You lost your job, but it's layoffs, okay? The highest that number had ever been before this started, back in the 80s and that mess, you got up to 695,000 people filed claims in 1 week. That was the all-time record. In the Great Recession, it edged up to 660. But it never broke 700,000, so we keep the records. In April last year, 1 week, or April 2020, 1 week, it was 6.9 million. 10 times anything we had ever seen before, so we keep the records. And that's what we're going through. And I think something more even more interesting about it was, it stayed at, 695 was the all-time record before that. Okay? It stayed above 700,000 for 54 consecutive weeks. We went over a year where we lost more jobs every week than we had lost in any week prior to that. And it's kind of give you a perspective on how this thing rolled back. It's very big. We finally started recovering, and some of the recovery pretty fast, and kind of slow down, speed up based on what was happening with stimulus packages and the virus, the waves up and down. Every time the virus got worse, the economy got a little worse. It's kind of, you track that pretty closely. But just kind of give you perspective on it, the U.S. economy lost 14.7% of all the jobs in the economy in those 2 months. We still don't have a callback. We lost, I mentioned 23 million, we're down about 2.5 million now. We're still down about 1.6% in the economy. Texas lost 11.2% of our jobs, not quite as big a drop. And we came back considerably faster. As of November, Texas back to even, and now it's a little bit ahead. A little bit ahead of Texas. We've gotten back there and we lost. Of course, the other side of it is, if this hadn't happened, we've been on an upward trend for that time period, and even more. But we're at least back there. Waco. You guys need to give yourselves a hand, man. You're doing pretty well on this thing. Only lost about 8.7%. That's good. It's a testament to the fact that it's a very diverse economy. You're not a huge, the energy economy's got killed. Some of them are still down over 10 to 12% before they were. That sort of thing. It speaks to the diversity and nature of the economy. You got yours back in 14 months. It took Austin 15. I'm just saying, it did really well. And Waco's now up about, about 2.5% from where one before we get back up to 2.5% from the previous peak. And what's interesting is in the past few months, Waco's about 1% of the U.S. economy, 1% of the Texas economy. We've had about 3.5% of job growth in the Texas economy the last few months. So Waco is doing very well right now. I think there are a lot of things that position that for the future. Our forecast, we just released our forecast for this year. We're seeing Waco growing at a compound annual rate of about 3.5% now for the next 5 years or so, which is right in line with the state. The state's a little bit higher for 2 reasons, basically. One is because the energy sector is so far down, it's going to have a big spurt, so percentage terms that moves things up pretty significantly. That's one part of it. The other one is you do have a couple of markets, including Austin, they're just happening to kill you in terms of new locations and that sort of thing. But this area is doing really a strong economy, diverse economy, some great announcements that have happened, some great new investments taking place on the river, downtown, and larger firms bringing facilities. I mean, it's really kind of a golden age for this economy right now. It hasn't had this many positive things going once in a very long time. Magnolia's had a big impact on that. It's kind of interesting to watch all that develop. Our relative share of the state's tourism dollars has gone up 44% in the last 5 or 6 years because like I said, we got a very minor still not a huge share, but we gained 44% of what we were in terms of the state. And that's really because of that. The hotel motel tax revenues quadrupled. And there was a reason to come to Waco other than Baylor and home games. And it's really been remarkable in the whole thing and what's done there. That there's good signs and a lot of good things are still happening there. So there's a lot of good happening there. I think what I want to do for a fair amount of time today, and I'm not even sure how much I have, but I want to focus on, I usually don't focus that much on national issues when I talk to groups here in Texas. But there are 4 things right now I think are worth mentioning. One's the supply chain, One's inflation, one's what's going on in Ukraine, and one's the workforce. Because they're all in the news a lot, everybody's talking about them right now, they're somewhat interrelated with one another. And frankly, I don't think all the reporting on them have been all that accurate. So I'm going to try to kind of give you a little bit different perspective on some of them. But let's start with supply chain. Okay? Just think of the world economy as a $100 trillion engine. Biggest engine you can imagine. That's about how big world global gross product is, about $100 trillion a year. It's been humming along just fine, uninterrupted, for 10 years, 11 years. Everything's rocking along just fine. And there seems to be going fine. There's nothing really particularly wrong with it or anything. No reason that you can't grow some more. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have those kind of traditional cycles of expansion stuff without old age or anything. It's still just kind of rocking along. And then you just suddenly stop it. That don't mean you tap on the brakes and ease it down. I mean, you turn off the key, jump out, and run into a tree. And then you take a few sledgehammers and just bang on it for a while. And then you let it sit out in the elements for a while. Go through maybe a freeze or cold snap or something like that. We had one of those y'all may have heard about. So, which strangely enough had a big impact on the global economy because we're trying to get stuff back in the country and get the supply chain fixed. And one out of every $6 that exports and imports from this country goes through Texas. We produce one, people don't realize that we're huge in terms of global economy. So when we have a cold snap like that shuts everything down, it affects the whole world. Big effect anyway. So we had that going on. Then you kind of try to restart it, kind of get it revving up just a little bit, kind of inching down the road, and then something else happens, so you just turn off the key, hit another tree, and bang on it some more. And then you ask it to start up, it's going to need a little grease. It's going to need a little oil. Everything's not going to work perfectly right off the bat. And that's what we experience. There's all kinds of things that happen in the middle of it that normally we could shake off the freeze, if it wasn't in the middle of all that other stuff. You know, we could shake off, you know, there's 3 big chip plants in the world that make all the chips. That's they can't get chips in the cars, they can't get chips in the washing machines, refrigerators, everything else right now. There's a big lot of this problem. There's 3 big chip plants in the world. We had a fire in one of them in South Korea, a huge fire, shut it down. So in the middle of everything else, those are the kind of things we can usually work our way through because if that's the only big thing going on, we can kind of roll with it. When that comes in the middle of everything else, that's when you start to have some very significant problems. So the bottom line is we couldn't get the goods in. You know, we couldn't get the goods delivered. We couldn't get the parts to finish the goods and that sort of thing. And so that, you know, that's kind of supply chain. The good thing about that sort of thing is it will work itself out. One of the nice things about markets, I know at least Todd's here, at least one of my former students is here. At some point in life, probably had to endure me giving a lecture on markets and how wonderful they are and how they have some problems too. But one of the best things about markets is that when you create a problem, at the same instant you create the incentive to solve the problem. And we're trying. We've got triple shifts going on at all the ports now. We've got all kinds of stuff going on. And you see all these numbers. We saw one just a couple weeks ago. They announced the balance of trade this last year was the worst in history. That's how bad that is. We were being killed by foreign competition. That was actually good. Because what it meant was the last 3 months of the year, we finally unloaded some boats. No, I'm serious. When they're sitting out in the water, they're not imports yet. You've got to get them in and do some paperwork for their imports. You know, so literally what it said was we're finally making some headway in this thing. You know, the last few months have big trade deficits, we're unloading some boats. That's a good thing. But we still don't have, you know, it all worked out, and then as I'll say, the Ukrainian situation makes it a little worse now. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. And then there's an inflation situation. It's kind of complicated, but I'll try to break it down a little bit. Short-term inflation, as most, there's a short-term and long-term element. I want to talk about both of those. Short-term inflation is basically, I'm sure you've all heard this at some point in your life, the phrase is commonly used as too much money chasing too few goods. And that's a pretty decent, okay, mandatory definition. Well, I just told you about the too few goods. We don't have the supply chain, we can't get the stuff we need. The other half of it was also true at the same time. When they both happen at the same time, it really gets you in bad shape. The too much money thing. We had a lot of, as you know, stimulus packages and that sort of thing happening during the pandemic, and we needed those. I mean, small businesses can't go 6 months without revenue, even well-managed small businesses. A lot of people who lost their jobs. I mean, they had no income for months. I mean, this was a once in a lifetime thing, or hopefully it is, once in a generation, that we had to step up and do some things. But it was Washington. They didn't get it exactly right. And honestly, they can't get it exactly right, because they'd have to really go door to door and see what everybody needed and give that to them. Practically can't do that. So you have formulas. So a lot of people got money they didn't need. Okay? So here's your situation. You got some money you really don't need. You got some extra money, burn a hole in your pocket. You've been cooped up for a year. Then they tell you you can go out again. What are you going to do? You want to get out, you got some money, what you going to do? You're going to go spend it. That was the too much money piece of it. So we had both things going on at the same time, and that drives short-term inflation. Again, the pandemic is going to make it a little bit, the Ukraine's going to make it worse because it's going to have some impact on energy markets. I'll try to say a little bit more about that in just a minute. And one thing that really happens is inflation's been up about, 6-7%, like the highest number in 40 years. You see all those headlines. Say a couple of things about that. In most people's minds, there have actually been studies, and economists study anything. When I was getting ready to write my dissertation back at Rice years ago, I asked one of my professors for advice about a dissertation. He said, well, if you're going to get out of Rice, you got to do something that's never been done before. He said, anything's never been done before, either too hard or too stupid. It's too stupid is a good dissertation topic. So, not too much advice. But anyway, point being, when we have studied this, most people's perception of inflation is the price of gasoline. So while inflation's up 6 or 7%, gasoline prices up 40 or 50%, it makes you feel much worse about it. And the reason for that is it hits us in the face all the time. You're not looking at the price of other stuff every day, everywhere you go, but whether you fill up your tank today or not, you're going to drive by 15 or 20 gas stations, you're going to make note of it. I go by here yesterday, and it's this it's 20 cents more. And that's where we form our opinions about inflation and works its way in the system. But the one thing I want to say about all these headlines, they make great headlines, worst numbers in 40 years. This is not the situation in the late 70s and early 80s. This is not the situation in the early 70s and early 80s. In case I forgot to mention, this is not. and I can somewhat speak firsthand to this because way back then, as many of you who've been around here for a long time know, I was a movie baby economist back then. And the stupid dissertation I wrote at Rice was on was a big model to measure monetary policy in the United States. That was back when models were a new thing. So when Paul Volcker got ready to get inflation out of the economy back then, I got hauled up to help. And I was a 25-year-old kid or something. They had me doing all this stuff. So I was there to watch it happen. Back then, we had institutionalized inflation. And we haven't done that now. And I can give you a simple example that some of you will remember, some of you were involved in. If you went to a bank in the late 70s, early 80s to open a savings account, okay? You're not buying a CD, you're not tying up your money, you're just opening a savings account. Okay? You got 5%. If you went to the savings and loan next door, you got 5.25%, because they want a little more than they would get the mortgage folks on the front. Okay? Well, what you've done there, you said the base cost of funds is right there. That's the base. So that's kind of the floor on inflation. It's going to be more than that. You kind of guaranteed that. And so you kind of build up. We don't do that anymore. We don't have any of those institutional structures in place. We got rid of all that stuff. And it was back in the 80s. It was fairly painful to do, but we got out of it. So this is not that type of structural inflation. But there is a long-term component to it. That's the short-term stuff. We talk about that. The long-term piece is, as I mentioned, we did add a whole bunch to the debt in the last couple of years. It's now over $30 trillion. Again, I think we had to do a lot of that, but it was a difference. They were faced with a bad choice and a terrible choice. Fortunately, they chose the bad choice. But the bad choice doesn't come without consequences. And so, down the road, the Fed's starting to tighten up a little bit. They're starting to cut back on the balance sheet. All those things are happening. They're doing it. We're going to have a little more long-term inflation, probably 0.5% a year or so, than we've had before. Before it's been around 2% for every, it's probably 2.5%, 2.6 or 7, something like that going forward. Our models are showing that, other people's models are showing that, but also, if you look at government bond rates, are showing that too, because they're kind of banking in a little bit more interest rate. Now this week they're down low, because when you have a big world crisis, everybody runs to the dollar. That's why everybody always talks about what is the dollar everywhere. Nobody holds dollars, and so just watch what happened this week. Anytime there's a global crisis, the world flocks to U.S. government securities for the security. The Ukraine situation, from an economic perspective, has several aspects to it. First of all, obviously, when it first happens, there's a big run-up in oil prices, then they come down a little bit. That anytime there's a big crisis of any kind, there's first an overreaction to the market, then it kind of settles down. That always happens. But it settled out at a pretty high rate. And I think, we can see, and it went up $4 on the day they do more bombing. People are going to watch the ebb and flow of this thing every day and kind of try to gauge how it's going to work out. And that's going to make the sanctions are going to have a big impact. Economists don't particularly like sanctions because, it's basically, we don't live in a vacuum. We can't do something that hurts Russia, but nobody else. The world doesn't work that way because we're all integrated and stitched together as an economy. And so when we do something that hurts Russia, it's going to hurt everybody. And so, I don't like that there are situations where you really don't have any choice, and they beat the heck out of some of the other alternatives we have about killing folks. So at times you have to get up and do that. But they will have some consequences for the economy in terms of making the supply chain worse. Ukraine is the biggest supplier of wheat. Okay? We don't buy much wheat from Ukraine, but that wheat's a global market. So whenever wheat prices go up, the supply gets interrupted in Ukraine, we're going to see baking product prices go up. And food prices are already part of this inflation. So it's going to make it more difficult. How much more difficult it makes is going to basically determined about how long it lasts and how bad it gets. And we don't know that yet. There's a lot of pressure being put on the system. Their currency is collapsing right now. There's a whole lot of things going on, a whole lot of pressure being put on with them. I work a lot with the European Central Bank, and I can tell you they're after it right now. And there's there's some things happening there that potentially can cause a lot of economic disruption in other places as well. So what it basically does, it makes it harder to deal with the inflation and harder to deal with the supply chain. So that's good to butts things up some more. Which means it probably takes another couple of months to get through that. I think you'll see overall inflation going down some by the end of the year, probably by the end of the third quarter or so, and we'll start to see the supply chain look a little better. But the wild part in all that right now is this Ukraine situation. One more thing. How much time do I have? Somebody watching the clock. I got 10 minutes? Okay, I'll probably burn at least 15 of those. But there is one thing I want to talk about at the end here, and I will wrap up with this bit for taking a few minutes. And it's something I don't say it to every audience, but you are an audience of people many of you have known for years, others of you I haven't, but I know who you are, who you represent, and you are people who are in a position to make things happen in this community and change things around and do things and move the needle and have influence beyond this community. So I want to spend a few minutes on it. And that is, I want to talk about the things that really drive economies long term. We get all worked up over Microsoft meet its earnings estimate this month, or what did the Fed chairman say at the last hearing. We get all worked up. We moved the stock market 4 or 5 points over one thing like that. Remember, I got an advanced copy of the chairman's last speech, and I looked at it, oh, there goes 300 points. I couldn't tell you about that in advance, or I had to go to jail. But anyway, but anyway, when you get down to what really drives economies in the long term, it's only about 3 things. And I want to briefly mention all of them. We will drill down on the third one. The first one is cost, trade patterns, that sort of thing. Where did it cheaper make stuff? And that hasn't changed much during the pandemic. It really hasn't. It's about the same as it was. The one thing that's happened that will help the United States economy some and help the Texas economy some is we are going to see more people bring more manufacturing onshore. Health supplies, chips, things like that. We haven't seen a chip announcement in this country in 10 years. In the last 3 months, we've seen $30 billion by TI and Sherman, $18 billion by Samsung and Taylor, and $20 billion by Intel and Ohio. I don't know if they messed up a lot of Ohio. But anyway, but the point being, we haven't seen any offsets $80 billion. And that's not a coincidence. We're going to make our own chips. And so you're starting, you'll see some of that reshoring taking place because all the new movements on environmental, social governance, and that sort of thing, it says, yeah, you're worried about the next quarterly report. Yeah, you're going to buy a lot of stuff overseas because it's cheaper, but you also need to worry about are you going to be here next year? And that may mean you need other suppliers. So we're going to see some of that, but it's not going to make a huge difference. The second one is technology. Technology drives economies. And we've certainly seen that. in spades. It's hard to believe still it's less than 15 years ago we saw the first smartphone. I mean, when you think of how our lives have changed as a result of that, it's pretty remarkable. Stop and think about it. Technology drives a lot of things. But again, the pandemic did materially affect our ability to create new technology. It did point out people's needs, which the market will go after. We saw a lot more, we saw a lot of new advances in security technology after 9/11. If you find out you need something, you create incentive for folks to do that. So smart folks will work on that. The third is what I want to focus on. Really, it's a boring subject. It's demographics. But it drives more things in the economy than anything else. Demographics is a study of how many people are born, how many people die, and where they move around in between. That's basically what it is. And here in Texas, that creates the greatest opportunity we could possibly have for our future. And it also creates the greatest challenge. And I want to spend just a few minutes talking about this. I'm going to be uncharacteristically serious for a few minutes here. First of all, when the census came out this year, it showed that there were 1,000 fewer, there were 1 million fewer young people in this country in 2018 than there were 10 years ago. 1 million fewer young people. Think about that, what that says for the future of the workforce. There were 440,000 more young people in Texas than there were 10 years ago. So another way to look at that is the other 49 states were down 1.44 million. We made up a good sluggish. And I mean, so that's a huge opportunity. That's the raw material for future economic growth, because human capital is the single most important thing that we have going for us. And a lot of people try to dismiss it. I saw some statistics come out the other day that just tickled me to death. We had the lowest birth rate, they said, that we've ever had in 2020. And immediately everybody on television was saying, it's because of the pandemic. Well, I got a bachelor's degree in math, okay? Can I do a little math? And here's what I figured out. We found out about the pandemic around March, so about 12 weeks into the year. It takes about 40 to get a baby. 40 and 12 is 52. So whatever reason we had for a low birth rate in 2020, it wasn't the pandemic. It was because we've been having low birth rates every year. We just continued to trend. Now 2021 may be a little different. I'm not sure how it'll work out because, the pandemic scares people, you have fewer kids, but then a lot of people cooped up with nothing else to do. We'll have to wait on that. 5 minutes, okay, I got you. I'll get serious. I said I'd get serious. Okay. But I want to talk about demographics for just a minute. I mentioned the young people. And I want to talk about Texas for just a minute. In Texas, in the last census, 39.7% of us are Anglo. 39.7. 39.3% of us are Hispanic. Now, those lines can come together. I can promise you on one day when nobody was looking, in the latter part of 2020, they crossed. There are now more Hispanics in Texas than any other race. And that's great. That's wonderful. I mean, a lot of cultural advantages, a lot of things going for us. But here's the challenge I want to put to you. Because it's a younger population, 52% of our school enrollment in Texas is Hispanic. Okay? The households that those kids come from have 5.7% of the household wealth in Texas. You've got half the kids and 5% of the money. What does that say about when they need a tutor? When they need broadband access, when they need a computer at home, when they need a little, summer enrichment program? They're not going to have the resources to do it. What if they want to go past high school and get a certification or something? Over 75% of them have. A lot of them finish, but they have to drop out at some point, interrupted for family and financial reasons. Okay? The black population, it's not been growing much, it's pretty stable. That's roughly 12% of school enrollment, but it's about 1.8% of the money. So you add those together, you got 2/3 of the kids and 7 or 8% of the money. The Anglo population, we actually have 125,000 fewer Anglos in the public schools in Texas than we had 10 years ago. But we have 55,000 more that are economically disadvantaged. Over 80% of the growth in Texas school enrollment in the last 10 years was folks who are economically disadvantaged. Okay. 1 out of every 5 has a language problem. Here's one, because I do a lot of this kind of work that kind of chokes me up sometimes. If you go in any two classrooms in Texas, on average, randomly, 1 kid's homeless. Every 2 classrooms in Texas. That's the reality of the environment that we're facing as an economy right now. And then the other, a couple more statistics I want to throw in. This one is a number the Census Bureau puts out every couple of years that nobody pays any attention to, but I find it fascinating. Every couple of years they put out a number that says all the people who are raised in the state, how many of them end up in that state as adults? May go off and go to school or something, but how many of them end up there as adults? And it's probably not surprising, Texas leads the country in that. 78% last time. Almost 4 out of every 5 kids that is raised in Texas will be a Texan as an adult. What that says is, yeah, we're bringing people from other places. We've done that since we were a republic. But the vast majority of the workforce we're going to have is the workforce we're going to train kids to school right now. You know, we'll give you another 2 more statistics. This one's from a very reliable group called Perryman. Those guys, since you were working, those guys are good, man. You know, so we did a simulation with model a couple of years ago, and I looked at the question, and I said, I'm going to do this. Let's assume that our educational system in Texas stays the way it is now. We don't get better, we don't get worse. And by that I mean at every level, elementary school, graduate the same percentage of everybody, junior high, high school, college, medical school, law school, whatever. Whole nine, we stayed the same. We don't get better, we don't get worse. Okay? But I added 3 words before I read the simulation. By ethnic group. And I just let the numbers do what they're going to do, because we're not going to change. That part's not going to change. It's what we can do to intervene in the education system that can change. If we let things rock along like they are, 15 years from today, taking out inflation, all this, the average person in Texas, not the average household, the average person in Texas will have $6,000 less income than we have today. Now, what does that say in terms of a state that needs knowledge workers to grow? What does that say in terms of a state that likes to keep taxes low because we don't want to have a lot of other things we have to vote? I mean, it starts to have some very, very serious consequences very, very quickly. Last statistic I'll give you, we rank 41st in the country or 43rd, depending on which measure you look at in per capita spending for schools. I say all that to you, again, I don't have a happy punchline or anything like that, but we really face a huge, I mean, having a pool of young people in this state is better than having oil fields in this state, or better than having, the technology complex in Austin. It's the single biggest resource for the future. Greatest opportunity we possibly have in our history. But there's a real challenge on us to take advantage of that opportunity. If we succeed, a whole lot of good things happen. If we fail, a whole lot of bad things happen. On that happy note, I'll be happy to take your questions or come use the program. Okay. Yes, sir.
Dr. Perryman, your worldview. Last night, PBS did a little special on the recent United Nations report on global warming.
Right.
What do you see?
Very, very good question on global warming and that sort of thing. And I will tell you, this is going to take me a few minutes to answer, so if you need to leave, that's fine. Okay? Because we've also been doing some massive modeling of global warming lately. First of all, it's real. Okay? Anybody tells you it's not real, they're crazy. However, the solutions they're offering are fundamentally wrong. Okay? I like to be an equal opportunity offender, so here goes. The Republicans are not funding enough in education. The Democrats have climate change all screwed up. Okay? So that's I like to be equal opportunity. Don't like to be biased. I've had both of them mad at me lately, so I must be doing okay. But anyway, here's the bottom line. If you take the Department of Energy's forecast for world energy in the next, frankly, it's too low, but let's just take that one from me, because that's the people who are putting out all of the guidelines and that sort of thing. Okay? If you take the Department of Energy's forecast of energy needs in the world in the next 50 years, their baseline forecast, shows the energy needs to grow about 48% in the next 50 years. I think it'll be closer to 90, but let's go with 48, that's fine. Okay? But they show, yes, renewables will do great, and they need to. They're very, very important to our future. We need them, and everyone will get them. They'll grow about 4.5 times, so they're going to knock the top off out of it. If that happens, we need 36% more oil and 31% more gas than we produce today. So if you say getting rid of fossil fuels, it literally cannot happen. Well, there's one way it can happen, I'll talk about that. But we're going to need fossil fuels. So the solution to that, the only solution that works is we have to figure out ways to burn fossil fuels cleaner as we do everything else. I mean, electric vehicles are great. There's some structural issues, there's some battery issues. They can't go as fast as some people think they could grow. They're going to grow really fast. They're great because they changed pollution from being what we call local source, which means the combustion engine runs up and down the road with pollution, to a point source. That means it's all at the power plant. Because most of that power is going to be generated with natural gas. So you're still going to have hydrocarbons in the mix. The Texas oil fields have the lowest carbon footprint of any oil fields in the world. 57% lower than the Middle East, 74% lower than the tight sands formations. So so the logical thing is use hydrocarbons, but you're going to have to. You don't have a choice, but do it better. Burn them cleaner. And the companies know this, that Exxon's investing $100 billion in this right now. It's going to be built in West Texas. It's going to make gasoline out of natural gas. And all people know this, but the financial community is pulling capital from the industry because you hear all these things about no fossil fuels in the future and that sort of thing. And know that so I guess half the report I think is pretty accurate on the solution is wrong. The only alternative to that is to grow less and hence not need too much energy. Just take that for a minute. The OECD, the 37 countries, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the 37 advanced economies in the world, have 1.4 billion people. The other half of the world has 6.4 billion. About 3 billion of those folks live in poverty. Okay? Let me give you this because I work, as y'all know, some of y'all know, I work a lot on social issues and social problems around the world, that sort of thing. 700 million people. Twice the population of the United States of America live on $1.90 a day or less. The only way those people are better off, ever get to be better off, is through economic growth, prosperity. So we really cannot afford. People talk about the environmental and social governance, they forget about the social piece. Environmental is very important, but also social. You have to balance this. You have to work toward a solution that not only solves our climate problems, and literally you can get 90% of the Paris car. Yes, I wanted to be a long answer. You can get 90% of the way to the Paris goals of the Paris Accord by converting electricity from coal to natural gas. That one thing you get 90% of it. If you throw in a whole bunch of renewables, you can get way over 100% of it, which we need to do. So the point being, the problem's been diagnosed correctly, the solution is not. And that's, it's something, I testified, everything I've said to you, I testified to Congress about. And they haven't thrown me out, they didn't throw a party for me. They didn't throw me out. So I have a real concern that the policies are wrong-headed, that's affecting the investment climate and that sort of thing. And we need, we have to turn that around. Now, teach you ask me a question.
Have you testified to Texas Congress about that?
Have I testified to the Texas legislature about underfunded education? About 40 times. Every time they listen to me, I go. Even if they won't listen to me, I still go. No, I'm very fortunate they do invite me to be a part of all these things, and all the task forces and everything else. But, and they've made some progress in the last two sessions. They haven't been more funds in the last two sessions. I do want to give some credit there. But we just have a long way to go, and I don't think we're really drilled down on just how significant the demographic shifts are and what they mean in terms of the challenge that we face. And that's why I say, when I talk to a preacher about this, it's not the most pleasant topic in the world. We all know I like to life. It's an important topic.
One more.
Have you looked at the effect of the ability to work online and mobility, how that's impacting?
Yes, that's a very good question. Workforce mobility, that sort of thing. I meant to talk about that before I got surrounded from the Ukraine. It happens to me. It's because it's very detailed notes now that I have. That's why this stuff happens. Now, the workforce, let me just say some quick things about it. First of all, we do have a workforce challenge. But it's not because of the pandemic. Some of you go back in your mind and remember 3 years ago, the single biggest problem companies were having was finding skilled workers. And that hasn't changed. It hasn't changed at all. We call it the Great Resignation. The truth of the matter is the working age population, percentage of the working age population working was 63.4% before the pandemic. It's 61.8 now. So yes, it's dropped 1.6%. It's coming up something there. It'll settle out probably 3/4% below where it was. I mean, there'll be some effect. But most of this problem existed before. They're talking about the 10 million job openings in the country. That's an all-time record. It was 8 before the pandemic. Sure. Sure enough, you can multiply 1.6% times our 150 million folks, you get about 2 million folks. It's amazing how that is, isn't it? And that math just gets you every time. Euclid was on something. But anyway, and as far as the work from home, it is going to change. There's going to be more remote work in the future than in the past. Most people are going to come back to offices, but they'll have people who stagger time and work part-time from home and that sort of thing, to some extent. But the reality is, before the pandemic ever started, 6% of the people worked from home. It got up to 35%. It's already back to 12%. So it's a myth. The myth that nobody's going to work again, or nobody's going to go to the office again, that's just not true. I mean, the numbers are already showing us that, and we're just now getting to the point where a lot of people are going to come here. We have to deal with daycare issues. We have a lot of things we have to deal with. But we have a workforce shortage issue that's critical. And that brings up another controversial issue that I've got myself in all kinds of trouble about. Fortunately, the Ford Foundation, maximum this one, so I helped me a little bit. But they run when people start criticizing them. They run. But anyway, that's immigration. And people talk about the undocumented immigrants and all that. People don't like that. That's fine. But I will say that's 40% of our construction workforce in the state of Texas. It's 10% of our jobs in the state of Texas. It's 40% of our agricultural workforce in the state of Texas. But forget that. Let's forget that. It's 25% of our doctors in Texas were not born in the United States. 23% of our engineers were not born in the United States. So, and in the past few years, we've gone from allowing legal immigration 1 million folks a year to 250,000. So that math's a funny thing. If you've already got a chronic workforce shortage, you got a mission to go get people. I don't think the solution is I don't get any more. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So the bottom line is, workforce is changing. It's going to be a huge challenge. We'll work through technology and replace some jobs with technology and that sort of thing. But remember, on balance over time, technology creates jobs. It doesn't destroy jobs. People think about that and talk about technology. It may destroy your job, but on balance, it will increase the number of jobs. And the very simple proof of that, we have more technology at each point in history, more people working at each point in history. When the wheel was invented, it destroyed 75% of the jobs that existed at the time. Okay? I guess everybody would haul stuff on the back, I don't know. But it eliminated 75% of jobs. But think how many jobs the wheel has and that technology has allowed to create over time. So, I mean, the point being, it's going to be with us. We're going to encourage people to come back in the workforce. We're going to encourage retirees back. We're going to try to get people who want to work part-time. We're going to accommodate that. We're going to put daycare in, parent care in, gyms, whatever you want. We'll do all that stuff to get people in. And all that. But the one thing I'll say to you is it is not a pandemic problem. This is an endemic problem. Going back to one of my 3 things earlier, demographics. It drives more of the economy than you could ever imagine. I've often heard demography from someone who was good with numbers and didn't have the personality to be an accountant. But I can tell you, it's a fascinating. So they really tell that joke about economists. I just have a good friend who used to run the Census Bureau, who's an advisor, so anyway, so that's it. I was told I had one more question. I guess that was it. So on that happy note, it's been a pleasure to be with you folks again, and look forward to coming back soon. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Dr. Perryman. That was wonderful. We are always so gracious with your time. We appreciate you coming every year to the club. Okay, so we will re-welcome and thank our guests, our Bruceville ladies, for being here today. Our next meeting is going to be March 15th. Again, it's a Tuesday, March 15th. Stacy Bruce will be talking to us about the Rotary Youth Leadership Awakening Camp. That's the Riley camp that we sponsor to young students to go to. Kate Ball's going to also talk to us a little bit about the Rotary Foundation, and we'll hopefully have an announcement about our spring social and what we're going to be doing and supporting in the youth service here. With that, we will stand to our forming text.